Lyra moved quietly through the tall metal towers that surrounded the dragon training arena. The air was warm, but carried a strange, electric smell. Smoke from the dragon fire mixed with the scent of ozone, making the place feel alive and dangerous. She pressed herself against the shadows, careful not to be seen. Her heart beat fast, but her hands stayed steady. She had learned long ago that hiding wasn't weakness, it was survival. From the edge of the arena, she watched the dragons and humans move. The trainers shouted orders, their voices echoing across the open spaces. Dragons of all sizes leapt, flew, and roared, their scales glittering under the strange sun. Some were small and playful, while others were massive, their wings casting shadows that could swallow a human whole. Lyra's eyes fell on a group of hatchlings near the center of the arena. They were tiny, barely bigger than her hand, yet they moved with a strange kind of focus. One of them, a pale gold with dark streaks along its back, struggled to keep up with the others. Lyra's chest tightened. She knew what would happen if Kale, the trainer, noticed. He had a sharp eye and an even sharper temper. Any weakness was punished, sometimes cruelly. She crouched lower, wishing she could do more. She wanted to reach the hatchling, to whisper to it and calm its fear, but one wrong move, and Kale would see her. She had to be patient. Humans weren't strong like dragons, but she had something dragons and humans both could rely on, her mind. She studied their movements, memorized patterns, and waited for the right moment. Kale's voice cut through the air. Focus. Every mistake costs lives. His tone was hard, like stone, and every dragon flinched at the sound. Lyra flinched too, though she stayed in the shadows. Kale was tall and broad, with eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. He moved with sharp, exact steps, like a predator hunting its prey. Most humans respected him out of fear. Lyra respected him differently, she knew fear made people predictable. The hatchlings huddled together, their small wings fluttering nervously. Lyra could see the tension in their tiny bodies. They were young, innocent, but their eyes held something older, something brave. It made her smile faintly, even as she stayed hidden. Somehow, these little creatures reminded her of herself. Small, underestimated, and forced to survive in a world that could crush them at any moment. A sudden roar startled her. One of the older dragons, bronze-scaled and massive, took flight in a rush of wind. Its claws scraped the metal platform, and the air trembled with power. Lyra ducked instinctively, feeling the vibrations in her chest. She could see the trainer's shadow move across the arena, long and sharp. Kale was already near the hatchlings, inspecting them, testing their limits. Lyra's breath caught. One of the hatchlings stumbled again, tripping over a loose stone. Kale's gaze snapped toward it. His lips curved in a cold smile. "Weakness will not survive here," he said, voice low but deadly. The little dragon shrank back, quivering. Lyra's hands clenched. She wanted to leap out, to stop him, but she couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she focused on the hatchling. She whispered softly under her breath, words only it could hear, calming its panic. Slowly, it lifted its head, ears twitching. Its small eyes searched the shadows, and for a moment, it seemed to look straight at Lyra. She smiled faintly. They understood each other without words. Kale's footsteps came closer. He bent down to inspect the small dragon. Lyra's pulse quickened. Every muscle tensed. If he saw her, if he noticed her hidden presence, the consequences would be severe. But she stayed still, blending into the darkness like a shadow herself. She had done this many times before, observing, learning, waiting. The arena was dangerous, yes, but it was also full of lessons. And she learned faster than most. The hatchling took a deep breath, and Lyra saw a spark of courage in its eyes. She felt her chest tighten again, a mix of fear and pride. Even small, young creatures could fight back in their own way. Perhaps, if she played her cards right, she could teach them more than just survival. She could teach them trust, and trust could be stronger than fear. Kale straightened and walked away, satisfied with his inspection. Lyra let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The hatchling looked at her again, its tiny body trembling but defiant. For the first time, Lyra felt a spark of hope. These dragons weren't just animals to train, they were allies. And allies, even small ones, could change everything. As the sun began to set behind the towers, casting long shadows across the arena, Lyra stayed hidden. She knew danger would return. Kale's anger was never far, and the arena was full of surprises. But for now, she had a moment of quiet. A moment to plan, to observe, and to build a bond that might just turn the tide. The hatchlings chirped softly, their tiny voices almost like whispers. Lyra smiled, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. She wasn't alone. And in the shadows, with danger all around, sometimes being alone in the right place was the strongest thing of all. Kale's footsteps echoed louder as he approached the hatchlings. Lyra held her breath, pressed low against the shadowed wall. Every muscle in her body was tight, ready to spring if needed, yet she stayed perfectly still. One wrong move and Kale would see her. One wrong move and everything could be lost. The hatchlings huddled together, their tiny wings trembling. The pale gold one, the one Lyra had been watching, stepped forward cautiously, as if sensing the danger. Kale crouched low, his massive hands brushing the stones near them. He sniffed the air like a predator, and his eyes swept across the group. Lyra felt the weight of his gaze even from where she hid. He was searching for weakness, looking for the smallest sign of rebellion. "This one seems fragile," Kale said in a low, harsh voice, pointing at the gold hatchling. His hand moved closer, and the little dragon froze, terror flashing in its bright eyes. Lyra's heart pounded. She wanted to leap out, to grab the hatchling and run, but she knew that any sudden movement would put both of them in danger. The hatchling's small body shivered, but then something unexpected happened. It lifted its head, tiny claws scratching at the ground, and let out a squeaky, sharp chirp. Another hatchling, slightly larger and dark bronze, echoed it, flapping its wings in defiance. Lyra's eyes widened. They were not just afraid, they were trying to protect each other. Kale's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "Defiance will be punished," he said, straightening suddenly. His hand shot toward the gold hatchling. The creature squealed again, spinning to dodge. Lyra's breath caught. The moment was frozen, fragile and dangerous. Then, something incredible happened. The dark bronze hatchling leapt forward, tiny claws scrabbling against Kale's arm. It screeched loudly, a sound sharper and more determined than fear. Another hatchling joined, biting at his sleeve. Kale froze, his eyes flashing with surprise and anger. He had trained dragons for years, but he had never seen such coordination from hatchlings so young. Lyra's heart surged. The hatchlings were protecting her, even though they didn't fully understand her. She stayed in the shadows, barely daring to breathe, as the small dragons risked everything. Each movement was a gamble, they were tiny, fragile, and no match for Kale's strength. Yet their courage shone like fire. Kale swatted at them, but they moved too quickly, darting around him. One hatchling landed on his shoulder, claws digging lightly into his jacket, while another jumped at his hand. He roared in frustration, his voice like thunder. The sound made Lyra flinch, but she didn't move. She let the hatchlings fight, knowing that their bravery was buying her a chance. The arena seemed to hold its breath. Other dragons paused mid-flight, watching the tiny group challenge the trainer. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, a mix of fear, awe, and disbelief. She realized, suddenly, that these creatures were more than animals, they were partners. Allies. Friends. Kale's eyes narrowed. He swung an arm, trying to knock the hatchlings aside, but they scattered, landing safely just out of reach. One small dragon let out a sharp squeak, and then another, and soon a chorus of tiny, determined cries filled the air. Kale stepped back, momentarily overwhelmed by the courage of the small creatures. Lyra's chest lifted with hope. She realized something she had always believed: courage was not measured in size or strength. Even the smallest being could change the course of events if it had heart. She felt a deep bond forming with the hatchlings, an unspoken understanding that they were fighting for each other, and for her. Kale's frustration turned to fury. He lunged, aiming to grab the gold hatchling again, but the tiny dragons reacted instantly. They darted, they swooped, and they flapped in perfect synchronization, forcing him to retreat step by step. Lyra's pulse raced. Every movement of theirs gave her more space, more time to plan her next step. She whispered quietly under her breath, barely audible, words of encouragement. "You can do this. Be brave." Somehow, she knew they could hear her, even if only in spirit. And they were. Their tiny bodies glimmered in the fading sunlight, wings trembling but determined, hearts full of courage. Kale stumbled backward, tripping slightly over the uneven stones. The hatchling seized the moment, swarming around him in a flurry of wings and claws. He roared, but the sound lacked its usual control. Lyra could see the surprise in his eyes. He had underestimated them, underestimated her, underestimated the bond between human and dragon. For a moment, everything froze. Lyra watched, heart in her throat, as Kale straightened. The hatchling stayed in formation, ready to defend, ready to fight. Lyra felt a fierce pride. She had never felt this connection, this trust, with any living being before. And now, she knew she was not alone. Finally, Kale stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. The hatchlings chirped loudly, circling around the gold one protectively. Lyra remained in the shadows, her chest heaving, but a small, triumphant smile played on her lips. Today, the tiny dragons had risked everything to protect her, and in return, she felt a bond stronger than fear, stronger than power, stronger than Kale himself. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the arena. Lyra stayed hidden for a moment longer, watching the hatchlings settle near each other, wings brushing, tiny hearts beating fast but steady. She realized that in the darkness, courage could grow, even in the smallest beings. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The next day, the arena was quieter, but the tension hung thick in the air. Lyra moved cautiously, staying at the edges, watching the hatchlings practice with each other. They were small, but their spirits were fierce, their movements sharper than yesterday. She could see the same determination in their eyes that had surprised Kale. She smiled faintly, these tiny dragons had already proven themselves brave. Kale returned, his steps heavy and measured. His face was set in a scowl, dark eyes scanning the arena like a hawk. He had not forgotten yesterday's defiance. Lyra knew he would push harder today, test the hatchlings more severely, and if she was seen, she would be the target. But she did not flinch. She had learned to stay calm, to think, and to trust her allies, even the smallest ones. The gold hatchling waddled near her, its tiny wings flapping nervously. Lyra crouched slightly and whispered, "Stay close. Be ready." The dragon chirped softly, almost as if it understood every word. She watched it carefully, memorizing its movements. Small, she realized, did not mean weak. Kale's voice boomed across the arena. "Today, you will learn obedience." His glare swept over the hatchlings. He raised a baton-like device that crackled with energy. The tiny dragons froze for a moment, sensing the danger. Lyra's stomach tightened. She knew Kale's methods were harsh, he did not hesitate to punish mistakes. The trainer advanced toward the gold hatchling first. Lyra's breath caught. The little dragon stepped back but stumbled on a loose stone. Kale's shadow fell across it, looming like a dark cloud. Lyra's hands clenched into fists, but she stayed hidden. She had to let them act. Suddenly, the dark bronze hatchling lunged forward, claws outstretched. It screeched sharply, leaping onto Kale's arm. The trainer jerked, startled, and the other hatchlings followed, flapping and screeching, creating chaos. Lyra's heart pounded with pride. The little creatures were not just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for her, and for each other. Kale's face darkened with rage. He struck at the dragons, but they were too fast, dodging and weaving with astonishing coordination. One tiny dragon landed on his shoulder, claws gripping his jacket, while another zipped around his legs. Lyra could hardly believe the sight. The hatchlings, so young and fragile, were showing a courage that dwarfed even the strongest humans. Lyra stepped forward slightly, careful to stay hidden behind a pillar. She whispered encouragement under her breath, "You can do it. Trust each other." It was strange to think that words could travel so far in this dangerous arena, but she felt a bond forming, a silent connection. The dragons were listening, not in words, but in spirit. Kale swung his baton, aiming at the gold hatchling, but the little creature darted to the side just in time. Another hatchling dove forward, landing lightly on Kale's arm and nipping at his sleeve. He roared in frustration, shaking them off, but the tiny dragons held their ground. Lyra's chest swelled with admiration. Their bravery was not just instinct, it was choice. A pause came over the arena. Kale's fury was clear, but he hesitated, studying the hatchlings. Even he seemed unsure how to handle their coordinated defiance. Lyra saw an opportunity. She moved slightly closer, ready to act if needed, but still letting the dragons lead. She understood now, courage could be contagious. Her presence was not as important as their bravery. The gold hatchling chirped loudly, a sharp, defiant sound. The others echoed it, wings flapping in unison. Lyra's lips curved in a small smile. They were teaching Kale a lesson he would not forget: strength was not always in power, but in loyalty and courage. She felt a deep connection to the hatchlings, a sense of unity she had never known before. Kale lunged again, swinging the baton with more force. One hatchling darted in front, blocking the strike with its small body. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was risky, far too risky, but the tiny dragon held firm, and the strike glanced harmlessly past. Lyra's breath came in quick bursts, and a wave of pride and fear washed over her. The trainer's frustration reached its peak. He kicked toward the gold hatchling, but the coordinated flurry of dragons forced him backward. Each tiny movement seemed calculated, each small squeak a signal. Lyra realized they were not only protecting her, they were protecting each other. Bonds had been tested, and now they were unbreakable. Finally, Kale stepped back, breathing heavily, his face red with anger and disbelief. The hatchling settled into a protective circle around the gold dragon, eyes bright and defiant. Lyra remained hidden for a moment longer, watching. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet triumph. The tiny dragons had risked everything and shown extraordinary courage. The lesson was clear: even the smallest, most underestimated beings could face danger and make a difference. Lyra understood it deeply. She knew now that survival was not about strength alone, it was about trust, bravery, and the willingness to stand for what mattered, even against impossible odds. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows over the arena, Lyra felt the first true spark of hope in weeks. The hatchlings chirped softly, wings brushing together, a quiet song of resilience. She knew Kale would return, fiercer than ever, but for now, she had seen something remarkable. In the darkness of fear, courage could grow, and even the smallest beings could change the course of events. Lyra stepped back into the shadows, smiling faintly. The hatchlings had passed their first real test, and so had she. Bonds had been tested, courage had been proven, and the arena would never feel the same again. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the arena was quiet, almost eerily so. Lyra crouched in the shadows, watching Kale pace near the dragon's training area. His movements were sharp and deliberate, each step radiating control and power. Today, she knew, he would push the hatchlings harder than ever. She could feel it in the way he surveyed the arena, eyes flicking to the smallest creatures as if calculating exactly how to break them. Lyra's heart beat steadily, but she was not afraid. She had spent the last days observing, learning, and building a bond with the hatchlings. They were not just tiny, defenseless creatures, they were clever, fast, and brave beyond measure. Today, it would all matter. Today, she would act. Kale's voice cut through the morning air. Obedience or failure. Choose wisely. He pointed his baton toward the hatchlings. The gold hatchling stepped forward nervously, wings trembling. Lyra's chest tightened. She could see the fear in its tiny eyes, but also the spark of courage that had survived Kale's wrath before. She whispered softly, "You can do this. Trust yourself." The hatchlings chirped in reply, as if hearing her words. They were ready. Lyra moved slightly closer, careful to stay hidden behind the shadowed pillars. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Kale relied on fear and intimidation. If she could distract him, even briefly, the hatchlings could turn the fight in their favor. Kale lunged at the gold hatchling first, baton crackling with energy. Lyra's heart raced. At the last moment, she threw a small stone toward a nearby metallic pillar. It clanged loudly, echoing through the arena. Kale's head snapped toward the sound. That was all the opening the hatchlings needed. The dark bronze hatchling darted forward, landing lightly on Kale's arm. Another tiny dragon zipped under his legs, scratching at his boots. Chaos erupted. Kale roared, swinging his baton wildly, but the hatchlings were too fast. Lyra's eyes shone with awe and pride. They moved with precision, as if she had taught them without words. Lyra stepped out from the shadows slightly, hands raised not to attack, but to guide. She watched Kale stumble back, his movements thrown off balance by the small, fearless dragons. Each flurry of wings and sharp chirps created openings, forcing him to retreat. For the first time, Lyra saw a crack in his composure. Even he, the feared trainer, was vulnerable to courage that refused to be intimidated. The gold hatchling screeched loudly and flapped its wings, landing on Kale's shoulder. The other hatchlings joined, surrounding him in a circle of determined energy. Lyra felt a surge of hope. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. Small creatures, underestimated by the world, were shaping the outcome. She realized a truth that had guided her life: courage and intelligence could overcome brute force. Kale swung the baton again, but the hatchlings anticipated him. One dove under his arm, another darted up to land on his back. His roars of anger echoed across the arena, but they lacked the control he usually commanded. Lyra whispered encouragement, watching carefully. She knew the smallest distraction now could decide the entire encounter. Then she acted. Moving quickly but quietly, Lyra grabbed a small piece of reflective metal from the ground and held it in the sunlight. A bright flash reflected directly into Kale's eyes. He stumbled, momentarily blinded. The hatchling seized the opportunity. They swooped, darted, and landed in perfect coordination, forcing him back toward the edge of the platform. Lyra's pulse pounded. The moment was tense, thrilling, terrifying. Kale's face was red with fury, eyes narrowing at her. But the hatchlings did not hesitate. Their tiny bodies moved with courage and intelligence, their squeaks sharp and commanding. For the first time, Lyra realized something profound: humans and dragons, no matter the size, could fight as equals when trust and courage were shared. Kale finally stopped, breathing heavily, trying to regain control. The hatchlings encircled the gold one protectively, wings raised, tiny claws ready. Lyra stepped out fully, standing behind them. Her presence was not a threat, it was a statement. She did not wield a weapon. She did not threaten. She simply stood, a human among dragons, and radiated calm confidence. Kale's eyes met hers. There was surprise there, and then, slowly, hesitation. He had underestimated the bonds between a human and dragons, the courage of even the smallest beings. He had believed fear could control them all. Today, he saw that courage and loyalty could defy power itself. Lyra felt a swell of pride. The hatchlings chirped softly, brushing against each other. They were safe, for now, and they had proven themselves. She knelt slightly, whispering words of praise to them, small yet meaningful. "You are stronger than you know." The sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the arena. Kale took a step back, finally lowering his baton. He was not defeated completely, but the lesson was clear: strength alone did not win battles. Bravery, intelligence, and trust could turn the tide. Lyra realized this would be the first of many battles, but now she had allies who were willing to fight beside her. As she stood among the shadows, the hatchlings close at her side, Lyra felt something she had not felt before: hope. The bond between human and dragon had grown stronger than fear. Today, the tiny creatures had risked everything, and together, they had turned the tide. Lyra smiled faintly, watching the hatchlings settle around her. Tomorrow, the arena would bring new challenges, but she no longer doubted their courage. They had proven themselves. And in the world of dragons and trainers, that courage, small, brave, and determined, could change everything. The arena was quiet in the early morning, but the tension was still thick in the air. Lyra stood near the shadows, watching Kale as he moved with the precision and force of a seasoned trainer. Yet something had changed. His usual confidence seemed fragile, as if the events of the past days had shaken him. Lyra knew this was her moment. The hatchlings had proven their courage, and now it was time to show the full strength of their bond. The gold hatchling chirped softly, nudging her hand with its tiny snout. Lyra smiled, kneeling to meet its gaze. "We've come this far together," she whispered. The hatchling's wings flapped slightly in response, a small but fierce display of trust and loyalty. Around them, the other hatchlings settled into a protective circle, eyes bright and focused. They had learned something in these days: even the smallest being could change the outcome of a battle when courage was combined with intelligence and heart. Kale's voice rang out suddenly. "Enough hiding. Face me." His baton crackled with energy, and he strode toward the group, eyes blazing. Lyra did not flinch. She had learned to remain calm, to think, to observe. Fear had no place here, only strategy, courage, and unity could win. The hatchlings responded instantly. They flitted around Kale with astonishing speed, their small bodies weaving between his legs and arms, claws ready, wings flapping in defiance. Lyra stayed just behind them, guiding them silently with her presence. She did not have a weapon, yet her calm confidence radiated power. The tiny dragons had learned from her, and she had learned from them. Together, they were stronger than fear itself. Kale lunged at the gold hatchling, but the tiny dragon dodged effortlessly, flipping through the air and landing lightly on his shoulder. Another hatchling dove under his arm, and a third nipped at his sleeve. Kale roared, but the force of his anger was no match for the courage of these small, fearless creatures. Lyra's heart raced, but she felt no fear, only pride. She stepped out from the shadows, fully visible now, and met Kale's gaze. "This isn't about fear," she said calmly. "It's about courage. It's about trust. And it's about respect." Kale froze for a moment, blinking at her, as if her words were a strange kind of weapon he could not comprehend. The hatchlings continued their protective dance around her, their chirps sharp and commanding. They were united, brave, and unwavering. Kale swung his baton, but the hatchlings anticipated every move. They darted, flapped, and landed in coordinated patterns that forced him backward, step by step. Lyra's eyes sparkled with excitement. The tiny dragons had turned the arena into their own battlefield, and Kale, for all his strength, could not dominate them. The realization hit him slowly: control could not conquer courage, and power alone could not win loyalty. The gold hatchling landed on Lyra's shoulder, chirping softly. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. These creatures, so small, had risked everything to protect her. They had taught her something profound: bravery is not measured by size, strength, or authority, it is measured by the willingness to stand up, even when the odds seem impossible. Kale's face reddened with frustration, and he finally lowered his baton. The roar that usually commanded the arena fell silent. The tiny dragon circled the gold hatchling, wings brushing together protectively, eyes bright with victory. Lyra stepped closer, kneeling beside them. She reached out a hand, and the hatchlings responded with soft chirps, nudging her fingers. They had won, not by force, but by courage, intelligence, and trust. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the arena, illuminating the small, brave creatures and their human companion. Lyra stood slowly, looking at Kale. "Strength without compassion is nothing," she said softly. "Courage is what changes worlds." Kale stared at her for a long moment, and then, without another word, he turned and left the arena. His lesson had been learned in a way he would never forget. Lyra looked down at the hatchlings. Their tiny hearts beat fast, yet they were calm, proud, and fearless. She knelt, whispering to them, "You've proven yourselves today. Not just to him, but to me, and to the world. Your courage matters." They chirped again, brushing against her hands and arms, a quiet celebration of victory. In the following days, the arena began to change. Trainers and humans alike watched the hatchlings differently, with newfound respect. The stories of their bravery spread quietly at first, and then more widely. Lyra moved through the training grounds with the hatchlings at her side, her quiet confidence inspiring others. She was no longer just a hidden observer in the shadows. She was a symbol of what humans could do when they combined courage, intelligence, and compassion. The bond between Lyra and the hatchlings became legendary in the arena. She trained with them not to dominate, but to guide, to teach, and to protect. Each small dragon carried courage in its wings, and together, they were unstoppable. Lyra realized that the galaxy itself was full of challenges and danger, but with courage and allies by one side, even the smallest being could make a difference. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the arena, Lyra and the hatchlings settled together. She looked at them, tiny wings brushing in the fading light, and smiled. The arena had been a place of fear and control, but now it was a place of courage, trust, and hope. She understood that their journey was only beginning. One day, their bond might change not just the arena, but the world beyond. And in that quiet, powerful moment, Lyra knew something deep in her heart: bravery, even from the smallest creatures, could leave a mark that no power or fear could erase. She was no longer just a human in the shadows. She was a leader, a protector, and a friend to dragons who had risked everything to show that courage, true courage, was unstoppable.